Thank you for joining us. Lee and I, along with our guest Ben, will be responding to Stephen Hargrave's message, where he tells us God is not separate from his throne, and that the throne proceeds out of God and is a part of God.
So God is sitting on the throne. Do not think of God himself separate from his throne. Think of this as a vision of God himself. And what we're going to see is one vision of everything that is locked away in the heart of God. So the throne is not something just that he sits on. It's given that way as a symbolic representation to us. And he certainly is seated there. But the throne is something that proceeds out of God as a part of God so that we know who God is and how he reigns.
This is a fascinating transcript for me, and I bet for Ben as well, because we share some interest in being philosophical. So we have God who is sitting on his throne, but then immediately we are warned that we should not think of God himself as being separate from his throne. Now, for me, that brought me to a screeching halt right there, because I think fried ice. You can't have that. So I don't know whether did that catch anybody else's attention, or was
So
I
how
up
do you
there by
mean?
myself?
Oh, it caught my attention, Lee, and it brought me right back to they placed themselves on that throne. If you remember, they have the 24 seats and they inhabit 12 of those. So because they are a part of that throne, and that throne isn't separate from God, it is a part of God. And you can see where they go from there, saying that, if you touch us, you're touching God.
Right. And in the very last of the series, Ray will say that the church and the throne are synonymous. So you get more of that same thing. They're merging everything. You have Jesus and the candlesticks. The poor guy can't even stand in the middle of candlesticks. All of a sudden, he's being merged into them. So there is that tendency for them to take everything and bring it together. And yeah, I'm sure I'm cynical, but I see that as a power grab. These people live for power, and this is one way for them to accrue power, because people look at them and think, oh my goodness, I am in the presence of near divinity or divinity here. And how dare I even think anything other than what they're thinking? So I think that's where that comes from. But if you're a Christian who hasn't really thought much, or if you're a person who hasn't really thought much about the nature of God, and you are a theist, and that is a person who believes that God is outside of creation and has created everything, then this flies in the face of that. God isn't part of anything. God is separate from, by his very nature. He created all things. So for Stephen to make this statement is to really change the very nature of God in your philosophy or the way you think about him. So I was really surprised. And again, we further down, he says the throne is something that proceeds out of God as a part of God. No, it isn't. I mean, not if you're a theist. There are other things you can be, but you can't be a theist and say that.
Yeah, and I would wonder where this logic would end. Is the sea of glass part of God? Does it flow out of God? Are the living creatures part of him? And then the obvious question, if you take that to its conclusion, is, are we? So it probably isn't real fair, if you're making up strict rules about this, to draw a border around God and say, well, it's not just the body that we see that's God, it's also the throne. It's also these apostles. Where's that border? Where does it stop? And it's very clear where they stopped it. Yeah.
They draw that border right at the apostles.
Right after themselves. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. I don't know, because this has there's a view of God that says, in essence, everything is God. And we've heard them say before that each person has some God within them. So all that falls, and I don't want to get overly complicated here or make it messy, but all that falls into kind of an Eastern or a New Age kind of approach to things.
These are subtle and interesting points in their theology that have huge ramifications for people's eternities and their presence, what they do with their money, all of that ripples out of here. And I don't think the apostles are unaware of that. That's why they do a whole series on this. And Revelation is great because there's a sense in which you can kind of come in the back door. Nobody knows what this means. It's all very interesting. There's a lot of references. And so when you seem to know what you're talking about here, it's tough to argue with that the first few goes around. And then you realize, like, wow, I mean, the whole Revelation, if you can read it, is about apostolic authority. It really points to Ray Tinsman. And it doesn't. It's just a lot of showmanship. It's a lot of figuring. It's a lot of symbols. It's a lot fuzzier than it sounds.
One of the things that is important to me as I look through this, and I've got I don't want to use maybe a much more literal mindset, but one of the first things I do is I look at the text to see if the text actually says what people are telling me it says. And so if you go to the text, it doesn't support the argument at all. There's nothing about the throne flowing anywhere. It says there are thrones, and then there are elders sitting on those thrones. So there's no support from the scripture itself. So it's the scriptures quoted, and then it's embellished even as it's being quoted, and you wind up with something that simply isn't biblical. So that's a bad sign. I mean, that would be, get up and walk out if I was at somebody's church and I was hearing that. I go, oh, my last visit. So I guess we can all agree then that it's unlikely that the throne is emanating from God, or at least I hope we can agree that that's true. There's no biblical warrant for it. And it does take us places we probably don't want to go, is what I'm thinking. All right, so that would be the end of there.
This concludes our video. Thank you for bearing with us. The resource slides go by rather quickly for sake of time. You may wish to pause on them to read them. There is a link in the description box to the Google Classroom where you will find the resources for this video.
Disappointment is a bitter pill to swallow, paying back the hope I borrowed from someone I never knew. It's a forfeit, humans in the suits of heroes, undressed by whispered conspiracies, in quest for the truth. But if the truth is what you're looking for, you don't get to choose the answers anymore. So tell me, do you really still believe that the truth will set you free? I do. Someday, well, if the truth is what I'm looking for, I don't get to choose the answers anymore. So tell me, do I really still believe that the truth will set me